Hi there! I'm Mike McArthur, librarian at the Oshkosh Public Library, and welcome to another edition of Librarian Learns. This is the show where I take a look at some local Oshkosh history that either I've wondered about or I've been asked about when I'm here at the library. This is actually the final episode of the 2020 Librarian Learns season. So if you like these, want to see more of them, hit like, hit subscribe, and there will be a new season in the spring of 2021. So look out for those. If you have comments and suggestions of topics you want to hear about, or you have corrections of things I talked about this year that I got wrong, let me know in the comments or contact me at the library using the links in the description. And with that, let's get started. Today we're picking up on the second half of the Southside Brewing District Tour, led by Lee Reiherzer, our local beer aficionado and historian. If you missed the first one, I suggest checking it out so that this part of the tour makes a little more sense. If this tour leaves you wanting to know more, I suggest you check out Lee's very excellent blog, the Oshkosh Beer Blog, or read one of his books, Winnebago County Beer, A Heady History, or The Breweries of Oshkosh. And with that, let's get back to the tour. So tell me about where we are now.
Okay, so we're on the far south side. We're at 16th or 24th and Doty. So there were two breweries at this site. The first was built in 1867 by a guy named Franz Wally. Franz Wally is the guy who started the Stevens Point Brewery, which is still in operation in Stevens Point. In 1869, he leased that brewery to a man named John Glatz. He was a German-born and trained brewer who had been brewing in Milwaukee at what the time was the largest brewery in Milwaukee. Glatz took over Wally's brewery, leased it out, and 2 years later burned it down. Another fire. He rebuilt a new brewery on this site, and it was called Glatz and Elser's Union Brewery. Elser was his brother-in-law, Christian Elser. What we see behind us, that stone wall, was part of a lagering cave that Glatz and Elser used for their brewery. So they would fill these lagering caves with ice that they harvested off the river, and they would ferment their beer down there. This was the largest brewery in Oshkosh, and it burned down once again. Fire was always prevalent at these places. You know, it's not just breweries on the south side that burned down. There were several breweries on the north side of town that burned down also. It was what happened. The brewery stood until about 1914. This is one of the breweries that merged to become the Oshkosh Brewing Company, and they still use this up until about 1914. And then in 1976, this was taken over by the city of Oshkosh and renamed Glatz Park. And these open lager caves were open up until like the 1980s. You could still get in there and you could walk around in these lager caves and see just, you know, how big they were. Just the sort of stuff you thought would happen down there.
Exactly what was happening.
Is exactly what happened down there.
Oh. So now we're standing in front of what was originally John Glatz's house.
Yeah, so Glatz was the owner of Glatz's Union Brewery, and then when that brewery merged with the two other breweries to form the Oshkosh Brewing Company, he became vice president of the Oshkosh Brewing Company. And towards the end of his life, in the early 1890s, he started building this house, which was referred to at the time as the Glatz Mansion. So John Glatz was a very proud, kind of obstinate man. He was constantly in trouble with other people. The lake, which is right there by his brewery, at one point, part of the lake area had been leased out to a Chicago company that was harvesting ice on it. Well, while they weren't there, Glatz went out there and took all the ice away and hauled it into his brewery. He was constantly in these kind of spats. At one point, he sued the city of Oshkosh. The city of Oshkosh had a tax that they imposed on brewers. And because Glatz was just at the city line, he didn't think he'd have to pay it. And he fought that battle with the city of Oshkosh until the day he died. That kind of obstinacy, that proudness of his, shows up in his house. Under the roof line there, against the plaster, he took broken beer bottles and had them embedded in the plaster. And the idea was that those were the beer bottles of all the breweries that he had vanquished. So it's kind of like the thing of a primitive king using the bone of his rivals to make his crown with. That's the way Glatz was.
Subtle.
Yeah.
Subtle. So tell me, where are we now?
Okay, now we're in the 1500 block of South Main. We're basically just across the street from where the Oshkosh Brewing Company was. In 1913, the People's Brewing Company of Oshkosh opened here. In the early 1900s, the Oshkosh Brewing Company came to absolutely dominate the beer trade in Oshkosh. If you had a saloon in Oshkosh, you were going to be selling Oshkosh Brewing Company beer. The saloon keepers got a little bit fed up with the way they were being treated by the Oshkosh Brewing Company. So they came together and banded together and they built their own brewery, called it the People's Brewing Company. And there's a reason they wanted to have it right by the Oshkosh Brewing Company, because they were kind of twisting the knife. Okay, so the People's Brewing Company was a cooperative brewery, so nobody could own a controlling interest in it. It was owned by hundreds of different people in Oshkosh, all had a small interest in it. And this quickly became the Southside's favorite brewery. This brewery lasted until 1972. In 1970, the People's Brewing Company was sold to a group of African-American entrepreneurs from Milwaukee, led by a man named Theodore Mack. And from 1970 to 1972, it was still named People's Brewing Company, but this group led by Mack tried to expand this into a nationally distributed brewery. Right. They took on a lot of debt, and that debt kind of sunk the brewery, and they're never able to really achieve their goal of making People's into a national brand. In 1972, the brewery closed, and it was demolished in 1974. So this is the last piece of the original brewery. This is the old bottling house, which built in 1913. So this is the last fully intact brewery structure that was part of the People's Brewing Company.
What are we looking at?
Okay, so in 1986, when the Oshkosh Brewing Company got torn down, they took the big emblem that was on the front of the brewery and they auctioned it off. And a collector named Paul Winter actually won that auction. Well, people felt pretty bad about that, so Paul Winter actually sold it to the city of Oshkosh for less than he won it for at auction. And the city of Oshkosh initially put it on the side of the Oshkosh Convention and Visitors Bureau. It stayed there until 2008 when it was moved here to the museum and put in this case. So this is pretty much the last piece of the Oshkosh Brewing Company that's standing in Oshkosh.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, it's an 800-pound terracotta emblem.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
That was it was made in Chicago and then brought up here to Oshkosh. This was facing Doty.
Okay.
So yeah, it was right over Doty. Yeah,
okay, so
facing
right
west.
where we were standing before, that would have been facing onto Doty,
Right.
which would have been the entrance to.
Yeah, those people that lived across the street, they wake up every morning, look out their window, and they'd see that huge emblem out there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was awesome. Big thanks to Lee for helping me out with this video. I, really never get tired of listening to Lee talk about brewing history. If this tour and multiple stories about once great breweries going out of business and being demolished left you a little bit depressed on the subject, hey, I suggest you could check out one of the 4 breweries that's operating in Oshkosh today. You got the Fox River Brewing Company, founded in 1995. There's the Bare Bones Brewery, which has been going since 2015. You got Highholder Brewing on tap at O'Mara's. And you had the Fifth Ward Brewing Company, which started pouring in 2017. Which makes a nice coda to this story that there is now a brewer in the Southside Brewing District for the first time since 1972. And if you want to learn more about brewing and get into it, you can always contact these SOBs. And honestly, all of that is pretty impressive for a town the size of Oshkosh in 2020. And with that, I say cheers, prost, and I'll see you next time.